Green, the color of principle, interdependence, nature, and ramp. As a fan favorite archetype, ramp has been a thing since the beginning, and it's mainly because of how powerful ramp strategies can be. So if ramping up into giant creatures is your thing, this next commander may be exactly what you're looking for. Titania Defender of Argoth is a very interesting mono-green option. She's a little expensive at 5 mana, but her abilities are so good that the investment is more than justified. But before we go on, let's take a closer look at her card. She's a 5/3 elemental for 3 green that returns a land from your graveyard to the battlefield, and says whenever a land enters the graveyard, put a 5/3 elemental creature token onto the battlefield. So with her abilities, if you have a land in your yard, when you cast her, you will always be only 1 land away from casting her again. She also makes fetch lands awesome. When piloting your Titania deck, the strategy is pretty much full-on aggro ramp, where the basic idea is to run lots of land and mana accelerants to quickly build into a large resource pool to cast big and powerful game-ending spells. Mixing this strategy with green's utility works cohesively to make something really powerful. The early turns of a Titania deck are going to be pretty straightforward. You're going to be ramping, either with mana dorks like Elvish Mystic and Raphellos, or with green's other ramp spells like Fast Bond and Explore. The fun part of this deck starts after Titania hits the battlefield, but when casting her, you want to make sure that you have a land to bring back to the battlefield from the graveyard. Playing her without triggering her ability is a bit underwhelming, and you want to make sure to put as much pressure on your opponent as possible. I find that running 4 fetch lands, Evolving Wilds, and a Wasteland is pretty good, and you will usually have at least 1 land to reoccur when Titania comes into play. With that being said though, once Titania is in play, it becomes really easy to build up a massive board and start dealing some damage. During testing, I noticed that there were a few cards that performed especially well, and I would go as far to say that these cards are cornerstones to making a Titania deck as strong as possible. But besides the fetch lands, Sylvan Safekeeper, Life from the Loam, Memory Jar, Garruk Primal Hunter, Fast Bond, and Zurin Orb all stood out and made games that I was losing winnable or made games complete blowouts. So why would you want to play this deck? What's so good about her? There's a bunch of reasons to give Titania a try, but her appeal mostly comes from the fact that you're playing a mono-colored ramp deck. Apart from that, Titania is fairly easy to play with less hard decisions to make over the course of a game, and since you are mono-colored, your mana is much better than most of the decks you'll be facing. Another great thing about Titania is that during a game, if your opponent skips a beat, it becomes really easy to overwhelm the board and take the game out of reach. Though Titania lacks much of the disruption that most other decks bring to the table, she makes it so your opponent must answer your threats or face losing the game. As far as matchups go, I found that Titania is best suited against other aggro decks. You're pretty much doing exactly what they're doing, except that your creatures are going to be a lot bigger. Even though Titania is strong and capable of ridiculous things, there are a few problems that I ran into, mainly the control and reanimator matchups. These matches are of course the most difficult. Dealing with counters can be very problematic for this deck, because you need to keep pressure on the board by increasing your threat level each turn. Counters put a huge dent in that plan, and just when you draw the out you need to take the game to the next level, a timely counter usually means the end. Reanimator, on the other hand, can be completely brutal. During my testing, I found that going first is crucial to doing okay against a reanimator strategy. The problem is that the reanimator deck puts out creatures bigger than your endgame, but bypassing all the ramping. So in order to prepare for these decks, I found it was necessary to make room for a few important cards. Number 1, Hall of Gemstone. At first glance, a below average enchantment can work wonders in a deck like Titania. Since you don't really have that much disruption, Hall of Gemstones can really put a damper on many of the 2 and 3 colored control decks. Number 2, Dosan, the Fallen Leaf. Counterspells are brutal against Titania, so Dosan is a great card that will help you against counter-heavy decks, and will also give you some wiggle room during your own turns to play cards without fear of removal. And lastly is a small graveyard disruption package. The Reanimator matchup is super one-sided, and as I said before, the die roll is crucial in this matchup, so you need to make sure that you have access to 1 graveyard disruption card as early as turn 2. I only have 3 graveyard disruption cards right now in the list, but I wouldn't argue with you if you wanted to run more. But even though she has a couple bad matchups, Titania is really strong and can really punish players who either underestimate her effect on the board or don't have anything to stop the shenanigans that she can cause. So if you guys are interested in building your own Titania deck, you can check out my build in the description box down below. I've worked on this list and I think it's almost there, so proxy her up and take her for a test drive. Anyway, I hope you guys give her a try, and be sure to check out the links down below for more information on Duel Commander. But before you leave, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, leave a comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep shuffling, Magic players.